Obviously there's no trees out here. Never been here before, brand new. Got tall weeds. Still kind of frozen on the bottom, so not real mucky at the moment, but because there's not much for trees out here, this may very well be a ground blind location. I do have a couple of old pop-ups that are in cornfield camo, so they're kind of a beige, and that's something I've definitely done in the past. And if I find something decent out here down over by that tree line, that might be a little transition route. I may very well set up a pop-up blind, something, or a natural ground blind, because a lot of times, oh boy, yeah, here we go. Nice runway right down this edge. A lot of times a natural blind in something like this is a lot better than being in a tree where your upper body, you're just exposed to the, you know, to the skyline. So ground blinds work great if you're in the right types of location, and this is definitely one of those spots. This is super dense, super thick. Got a runway going there, there, there. They're small runways. They're just, you know, kind of faint. But that's typically what bucks, mature bucks do. They, you know, you're not going to have, they're not usually travelers of those big wide runways where the does and subordinate bucks travel. They usually skirt the edge of this kind of stuff because of the security cover. So hopefully right up here, some of these things will come together, because you got a red brush row there. You got this edge here. Deer are definitely going to bed in here. Probably when this is up and high, I'm assuming deer will bed in here too. So right up here in this corner, it looks like it could potentially be a good spot, or that corner over there. So we're going to check that out. Okay, we're back in that cattail marsh, tall weed marsh. This is that little brush line that we were just looking at. It's kind of splitting these two. There's a little creek right here, and you can tell this is a runway right here. And I would almost 100% guarantee this runway here gets used by bucks. Not saying it's not going to get used by does, but this here is definitely a buck runway through this cover. Comes out through there, and then there's another run comes in here, crosses and goes over there. And camera guy, scan around there and you'll see those tall weeds. I think right there where you're panning around, there's those really tall weeds. I think that's a great place. There's a rub right here. There's no rub here. I think that's a great place to put a ground blind, and just a natural ground blind. I don't even think you have to put a pop-up in there. One of the downsides of pop-ups is if you leave them out there for a long period of time, they kind of rot and the weather destroys them. So if you put a pop-up in there, it'd have to be there for probably 2 months, because you'd have to put it there and let them get used to it at least a month before season. So I'd probably be better off building a natural blind in those weeds, which we can do that on another time. But as you can see, just the way he's panning around here, you got a lot of weed edges, a lot of tall stuff. These weeds are all going to be really tall, phenomenal security cover. Great area for deer to transition to. This is definitely a bedding area. Not much bedding and tracks in here right now, because deer have no reason to be in here this time of year. This is early March. Deer bedding more on peripheral stuff. You know, in the winter they do that. They don't have to be back in this thick stuff because nobody's bugging them. But great spot for fall. A lot of old fall sign right back in here. Okay, we're still back in that marsh, and we found one tree that had some height, and it's a big old maple. And there's a big stand up there, and I will almost 100% guarantee somebody was gun hunting out of that blind, if they're not still gun hunting out of that blind, because you got a huge visual over this whole weedy area. So you can cover a lot of ground from that spot. And it looks like they've still, you know, looks like they've trimmed out some stuff up there, even though they're not supposed to, because it's pretty clear right in that opening above that stand. Great gun spot. I don't think it's that good for a bow. That other spot down in that corner was a lot better, but great gun spot. Okay, we're in that brushy area by those weeds. Obviously there's bucks bedding back in here. That's why these rubs are here. Here's a rub, here's a rub. Rubs on those trees back there. Some rubs over here on these trees. It's pretty common. You get back here in this red brush, back in the middle of a marsh or a swamp, bucks bed back here, and you're always going to see a lot of rubs. This one's not too bad. That's kind of tall, probably a 2.5-year-old buck. I tend to look for tall rubs that are up there in the 3.5 foot range. And I don't pay a heck of a lot of attention to rubs unless I'm doing my speed tour, you know, just prior to season, and I'm obviously then if trees have apples or acorns or scrapes are active, you know, then I like to see rubs around it to confirm buck activity, and then I judge the bucks by the height of the rubs. But for the most part, while a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on rubs, I do not, unless they're tall. Okay, now when we're talking about buck rubs, this bug rub means something, obviously. It's up in that, you know, 3.5 foot height, and it's kind of a big diameter tree. Now this side here was rubbed a couple years ago, but this side over here was fresh. This was rubbed last fall. So there's definitely a big buck in this area. If somebody didn't shoot that deer, this is definitely at least a 3.5-year-old deer. There's tine gouges up into here. And up here, there's tine gouges as high up as here, which is 4 feet tall. And it's obvious this here is fresher right here than on the other side. It's all covered up with pine sap. So when I see rubs like that, it gathers my interest. But still, this here's in a relatively open area. And, you know, for me, because over here this is open, there's some brush right there, but it's real narrow out to a open weed field, a shallow, short weed field. So this here is probably visited after dark. I seriously doubt this is visited during daylight hours. So while this is cool, lets me know there's a big buck in the area, if he's still alive. But I wouldn't set up on something like this because it's just too open right in here. Just too. This is common. This is the most common thing you see on public land. Here's a ladder stand. Somebody left it here. They're not supposed to, which I could care less, but it's obviously been here for a while. The seat's all chewed up. But it looks like pretty decent stand. But what do you notice? It's in open timber. No weeds, no understory whatsoever out in this timber right here. You know, there's some thick stuff over there. Why he's not in that thick stuff, I don't know. Why he's not in that thick stuff. You know, there's a swamp that direction. You know, there's oaks here, so deer come in here feeding, but the odds of killing a mature buck in this open timber with no understory in the daylight is real close to zero at best. I mean, you gotta be either on the edge of thick stuff or within the thick stuff when you're hunting public land, especially in pressured states. You know, up in the Northeast and some of the Midwestern states. You could get away with this out west, Illinois, Iowa, stuff like that, but for Michigan, this doesn't get it. This is something very rare. There's 2 apple trees right there. And there's an apple tree right there. Just skirt through there really fast to see those. They're all old. Obviously they're really tall and they're straight and they got a lot of little branches in them. But this is something I may prep a location here and then come back and see if it's dropping apples. There is a couple trees here to hunt from where you could shoot to all 3 of them. But again, that's a rarity. I'm gonna go over there and see what it looks like underneath them. Well, underneath these 2 apple trees, the other one, which is right over there about 20 yards, it's just total trash underneath it. So I don't think that one's had apples for a while. But this one here, these 2 apple trees here, and they're primarily overhanging this edge of this marsh. Looks like they have had apples. So what I will do here is I will wait until spring, probably May, June-ish, come down here and see if there's any apples that are going to be on this tree. There should be some small ones. Come down here and see? And if there are, I'll probably prep something here. A lot of these branches are not live. They could be busted off, a lot of these low branches, and there's 2 or 3 trees over there where I could shoot to the back side of these trees. All these low branches are dead, so I don't think it would hurt anything, but these upper ones are all alive. So there's 2 apple trees here. If they produce, this would be a good spot. There's definitely runways, and obviously if you kind of pan this, we've got this marsh here, we've got autumn olive over there, tamarack swamp, and we're right on the edge. And we had to go through a lot of nasty crap just to get back to this spot, and there is no access that way for 2 miles.
Recorded.
We just stepped into this public land, never been here before, and there's some swamps in here, some marshes, there's a river back behind us, and this is something we're going to check out. It's postseason. Had a ton of rain last weekend. That wasn't wet, I don't think, until just recently. Neither was that. My son had been here, but I've never been here. And coming in here, I just noticed from a distance, I haven't walked back there yet, there's a couple tree stands back there that I can see. And this is typical what people do on public land. They set up, there's a lot of oaks here, there's white oaks, there's red oaks, so there's a lot of mast here. And I'm sure they probably see some deer here. Michigan has a lot of deer. We never have a problem, you know, seeing deer really. It's just seeing mature deer. You know, that's kind of the locations I'm looking for, is places where there's going to be daytime mature buck activity. And even though there's going to be lots of food here, the years these oaks produce, which I'm sure some of them produce every single year, look how open the woods is. You know, it's just extremely open, and a mature buck in a pressured area is just not going to move through this open, vulnerable area during daylight hours. It just is not going to do it. Possibly if he's physically with a hot doe, he might. But as far as just transitioning from point A to point B, he's not going to do it through this open woodlot, and he's not going to come in this open area to eat during daylight hours. He's just too vulnerable. He's probably, if he's 3 years old, he's been shot at before, he's probably been wounded. So when you're hunting in, you know, public land in heavily pressured states, keep that in mind. Don't just set up on open timber. You know, you may see some rubs in here. You might see an isolated scrape on a runway or something like that, and you're going to see acorns on the ground, and you're going to probably see a lot of droppings because deer are in here feeding it primarily after dark. But for daytime activity, open timber like this, even when it has food, it's just not conducive to mature deer activity during daylight hours. We're going to go check out these stands, and again, I've never been on this property in my life. Thanks for watching another episode of Eberhart Outdoors, and please like and subscribe.